Hello, hello, everybody. How's it going? Welcome. This is Carl's Roller Coaster Podcast. Hello, Felipe. Welcome to the roller coaster, my friend.
Hey, how's it going, Carl? Good to talk to you, man. I miss you.
Miss you too, brother. It's been way too long, hasn't it? It's been way too long.
Absolutely. We need to get together again soon.
Hopefully 2022 will be the year that live music returns to our lives and we'll get to go into new adventures again.
Yeah. I sure hope so. Yeah.
Amazing. Felipe, thank you very much first and foremost for taking the time today. I know it's quite difficult with family and and this period now, which people will be listening to this probably end of January, but we are taping it between Christmas and New Year's. So thanks again for taking the time and yeah, it shall be a good one. It shall be a good one.
Thanks for asking me, man.
Of course. I want to start basically asking you, how was your upbringing and where were you born?
Well, I was born in São Paulo, but at 1 year old or one and something, I moved to Rio. And my first childhood memories are, of course, from Rio. I lived there from 1 to maybe 8 years old. And I learned how to talk in Rio. I first went to school in Rio, so I have these memories from my childhood there. I lived in a very nice place, actually, which was like in the beach. How do you call it? Very close to the beach in Leblon, which is a very nice neighborhood in Rio. And I was always at the beach, always close to the beach, doing something by the sea, riding the bike and whatnot. And I remember friends there. And I remember I studied at an Irish school, actually, in Rio called St. Patrick's. And that's where I first learned English, by the way. That's where it all started for me. And then we moved back to São Paulo as I was 8 years old. And my family is mostly from São Paulo. And so my grandmother and grandfather from both sides were from São Paulo. And soon enough I had lost my Carioca accent and I was a Paulista again. And so that's it, I think.
And so you attended primary school in São Paulo then?
It started in Rio, and then I moved in the middle of the second year to São Paulo. I don't know what it's the equivalent year elsewhere, but that's what it is here.
Did you, after high school, did you go to university? What were your parents involved in terms of making a living out of? And did you have any sort of kind of like pressure from them in order to carry on with your studies?
I think it would be unfair to call it pressure. I think it was more like, make up your mind. You can't just sit on your ass all day and, if you don't know what to do, you can do a course that is more generic and which you can apply the knowledge to many areas. So that's why I went to the uni, right after high school, and I enrolled in business administration. But that didn't last very long because soon enough I was playing in a band and all the guys were in the music university. And I was in the third year of business, but I wanted to move to music. So I, locked my uni of business and went to music, which didn't please my dad. He always wanted me to do something. He didn't think it was very productive to wait 1 year and figure out what to do because anyway, what I wanted to do already then was to be a musician. But I didn't have, at the time, any means to be a musician. I was just, a boy with no real career in music yet. So I think he was right in the end. But of course, when I joined the university, I also joined the Podiano band. So we went on tour, and I missed a year because I, I didn't go to school anymore after that. We went on a 1-month tour, and actually, when it all ended, because we were supposed to do more shows with Podiano around the world, and we actually had a tour scheduled for the U.S. with 23 dates. So just imagine me, barely 20 years old, recording an album with Podiano, and my luggage packed to go to the USA for a 23-day tour with Podiano. And the day before the trip, I get word from the manager that Paul was blocked at Border Patrol in the U.S. He tried getting in from the plane where he came from the U.K. Then he tried going to Canada and crossing, driving, and he was denied both ways. So my tour was canceled, and I was very disappointed. So I went back, actually, to business, to the business uni, and then I joined Angra. So that's my story with university.
All right. Okay. So we went a little bit ahead in the conversation, which obviously made sense. But let me backtrack a little bit before we get into all that, because it's a fascinating, obviously, career that you've had, and I actually myself remember that period from you playing with Karma and then joining the Diano band. But let's get into that a little bit later. When did you first picked up a musical instrument, and was it the bass straight away?
No, it was the nylon acoustic guitar, which is very, very common in Brazil for people to start with it. It's just the kind of instrument that every family has at home. But I was very lucky because I was actually not far from here. I was at a beach called Juqueí in the state of São Paulo. And a friend of mine, one of my best friends still to this day, his dad he passed away a few years ago, a great composer of jingles, of advertising music. And he was a genius. And we were on the beach. My mom and his mom were friends, and they worked together as well. So I was there for the first time. And we learned the first song together, which was La Bamba. We used to play the guitar laying down on our laps. And with our thumbs, we would play the notes, both right and left hand. And I was so fascinated by the acoustic guitar that he ended up lending me the acoustic guitar for the night. So I took it with me to the hotel I was staying in, and I was playing it and, trying it out the whole time. And that got my interest, really, really quickly. So my grandfather paid for some lessons on acoustic guitar for me, and that's where it all started.
Amazing. And when did you first play the bass? And when you like with the instrument, how many? I mean, did you remember more or less, like, you hear those stories of people playing electric guitar for 8 hours during the day and not doing anything else, forgetting about socializing and having a life. Do you relate to any of that? How was the process for you to learn the bass? Did you follow any formal sort of education, or were you like self-taught basically?
I was basically self-taught, but I had this background in music lessons with acoustic guitar. I had just picked up the electric guitar, and the first bass that I ever played was at the same school where I learned the acoustic. But then at my school, there was a band forming. They wanted to play a show in a spring festival that the school was having. And they needed a bass player. They didn't have one. And a friend of mine, who's now a very famous bass player in Brazil, we were 13 at the time. He told me, dude, you already play the acoustic guitar. Just buy a bass and come play with us. You know. So I went to the music shop, and with $80, I still remember, I bought my first bass. And 1 week and a half later, I was playing bass at the show, playing Guns N' Roses and what else? Led Zeppelin and a bunch of songs from, whatever was on the radio at the time. And I also was the singer. So I played bass and sang. So in a matter of 1.5 weeks, I became a singer bass player in this band. And the bass came very naturally to me. So it was just so fun and so easy that I kept on doing it and learning more songs all by ear. And I got very much into Metallica at the time. So I had a band with the same guy. And this other guy that was the son of the the jingle composer. He played drums in this band. And we mostly played Metallica and Megadeth and Anthrax, all the Bay Area thrash metal stuff. And I just kept on going because it was just so fun and easy. And I can relate to the 8 hours a day thing with the bass, but not exactly playing exercise at home or things like that. I was mostly learning music and rehearsing with my friends. That's what I was doing. Never playing exercises at that time. And I think my evolution was proportional to the level of difficulty of the music that I wanted to learn. So I was preparing for the next level of music that I wanted to learn. And those became my exercises.
It's really interesting that you say you basically you were learning, by ear, just listening to your heroes and playing music with your friends, because it's kind of like very similar to how most people tend to, evolve and create their own style. I was just watching yesterday the Gibson Icons with Jerry Cantrell, and it was just like that. I mean, as soon as he picked up the guitar, he started playing. He didn't want to do anything else. He just wanted to play music with his friends and learn, the music that he was listening to and exchange information. And obviously a completely different time, we didn't have any of the facilities that we have nowadays with digital, that you can just, I've heard about this band. You just go in any second, wherever you are, you just press the button and you can listen to. So you were more like,
you had to harvest. You really had to harvest for the music and copy for the 20th time from a tape that sounded so bad there was more noise than music, and try to listen to anything in those tapes. And going for the records, those were expensive. I didn't have the money to have many records. And we didn't have access to YouTube, of course. So learning the songs was up to us. Basically. Of course, we had friends and we exchanged ideas and we taught each other what we knew, but it was a very different time because you really, had to want it. It was not easy at all.
What was the name? Did this band have a name? What was your first band that you kind of like got somewhat serious and started to rehearse and perform gigs? Do you remember how old were you and what was the name of the band?
This first band was called Holocaust, and then it was called Immortal Dream because we discovered a band named Holocaust anywhere else, as it made any difference, but we ended up changing the name to Immortal Dream. Very original. But actually, I didn't play very many gigs before having a very, a more professional band. We were mostly rehearsing and playing like college gigs, those festivals of college bands. And I started gigging more with a band called Fire Sign, which is a more serious band, right about the same time as Karma. So Karma and Fire Sign were the first bands that really had gigs that we would play, pubs and travel to play around São Paulo area, the state of São Paulo and whatnot.
So was it with Karma your first high level professional recording that you did, or did you do anything prior to that?
Those two, Karma and Fire Sign. And we recorded it was basically the same band, the same singer, same drummer, same bass player, just a different guitar player and keyboard player. And we recorded both albums at the same um, era and like 1 month apart, and at the same studio. So my first real experiences in the studio were, very close to each other in the same studio, which was owned by Tiago Bianchi, singer of Nocturnal. And yeah, it was very exciting time for me, because the bands were getting better, sounding better, we were playing better, and achieving more, and working on, you've been through it, all that, working on the artwork for the CD, and the record label would release it. And our manager at the time was Marcos Cardoso from Encore Records, which I'm sure you remember. Encore Records, they released a bunch of stuff at the time. And so that was the start of the professional career, even though they were underground bands.
How did it happen? How did Rafael and Kiko and these guys heard about you? What was the first contact? How did it go from you performing with Carmen Firesign and Diano, and then eventually meeting with them? And what was the process? I mean, was it a meeting first and foremost? Did you guys go straight into the studio to play some music? Tell us a little bit of what happened like at that time and what you remember from that time.
Well, it was very informal, to be honest, because Angra was searching for a bass player. They already had Achilles on drums, who I played with at the Diano band, so I already had that reference for them. And many other people that I knew in common with Kiko and Rafael from this music school that they taught, and I also was always there. We had already met at this school, which was called Souza Lima Conservatory, very famous in São Paulo. And so they were basically surrounded by me, because many people talked about me to them, and they were forced to give me a call. So one day, out of the blue, Kiko Loureiro picks up the phone and calls me. I'm home. I remember like it was yesterday. And he said, Felipe, you probably know that Angra is searching for a bass player. And I wanted to know if you're interested in coming to my house and talking about it, and we can maybe jam, bring your bass. And I said, of course. When would that be? He said, what about tomorrow? So I said, yeah, let's do it. And at that time, I knew that Angra was looking for, musicians, but I was not very involved in that. As I told you, I had just gone back to the university. My head was somewhere else, and I was not very much into the scene and knowing a lot about it. So he called me, and I said, okay. So tomorrow morning, I have to be at Kiko's house, and it would be wise to know some Angra music, right? And I had Angel's Cry. I had the CD, which I loved, by the way. And I played the first track, Carry On, and I tried to play Carry On, and 30 seconds in, my arms were hurting, and my fingers didn't respond anymore because it's a very fast song. And I said, wow, tomorrow is going to be great. But yeah, so I went there with my bass in my back, took a bus, 2 buses, by the way. And to be honest, we mostly talked for like 40 minutes, 1 hour. And he wanted to know my background, which at the time was very little, very inexperienced.
Was it just the two of you in his house?
Just the 2 of us at his place. And he asked me about my musical background, what I liked to listen to, what I studied. And we, of course, had many friends in common, so we talked about that as well. And he suggested that we jam a little bit. So we didn't play any Angra music. He just had one of those backing tracks where you have like a vamp or a chord progression, and you just improvise over it. So we did it for like 8 minutes, trading solos and, playing grooves and whatnot. And at the end of that, he said, okay, Nice. But what about the Angra music? Can you play it? I said, of course I can. Of course I can. And he said, can you show me a little bit? And I said, sure. And I remember I showed him a little bit of my three-finger technique, which at the time not many people did, which is, basically playing the right hand with three fingers instead of two, which is the normal way of doing it. And he was kind of intrigued by that. He said, three fingers in the right hand, does it work? I said, sure it works. Yeah, trust me, man. And that was basically it. He asked me about my bass, because I had an Ibanez bass, which I still have to this day, actually. And the previous bass player had a Music Man bass. And he questioned me, why not a Music Man bass? I said, I'd much rather play an Ibanez, but if you guys need me to play a Music Man, we can, work on that. And he said, no, as long as it sounds good, I guess it's fine. So you could see that they were a little bit insecure about what was going to happen with this new lineup, three new guys, in a very well-established band at the time already. But there's a very funny story that happened between my going to Kiko's house and 2 days later when I got the call. The very next day, I went to Sousa Lima, the very same music school that I have met them before, and I was crossing the roads, the streets. And in Brazil, as you know, it's customary for people to cross when the lights are red. You just cross in between the cars. So I was doing that, and the lights went green, and the car started moving. And one of the cars was a little bit distracted and almost ran over me. And I had that movie moment where you have your hands on the hood. And you look at the driver, and guess who was the driver?
Who was it?
It was Rafael.
Really?
No kidding.
Dude,
no kidding.
That's crazy.
And so, yeah, you see how things connect when it has to happen. And, yeah, sure enough, the very next day, I got the call from Kiko welcoming me into the band. And, Rafael, how he's all mystic and, he believes in all these mystic connections, that the universe is all connected. So I'm sure that our meeting in the middle of the street pushed a little bit in my favor.
I bet. I'm sure it did. I didn't know about this one. This is a really good one. It's a good one. So at the time that you got the call, so 2 days later after meeting Kiko, so you didn't actually have a meeting with Rafael from my understanding. It was literally just this moment on the street that you guys just, maybe matched each other's eyes, and that was it. But who you mentioned that Achilles was already recruited as their drummer at the time, at this moment?
And Edu as well. Edu was in the band as well.
Right. So after that, you got the call 2 days later, and then when was the moment that you actually... did you go and enter the room and face those four guys? Because you met with Kiko, and then all of a sudden you're the last piece of this puzzle joining the band. Was it like that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. They were recording demos in a studio in São Paulo called Creative Sound. And they scheduled a meeting there, maybe 3 days later. And I had never met the manager. I knew Rafael from Sousa Lima, but I had never met the manager. And I knew Achilles, of course, from Codiano, but I didn't know Edu. I think we never met before that. And so, actually, no. I think the first thing that I did was I went to Rock Brigade's office to meet with Antonio, the manager. And he basically got all my info and, drafted a contract and whatnot, and talked to me a little bit about what was about to go on with the band. And then the first time that the band met was at a photo session, actually. And we met right there at the photo session. No previous introduction or anything, So yeah, the gathering of these five guys was in the photo session. And then we had a meeting at the studio. And I remember it was funny because at the time I was just a guy, broke, not a lot of perspective in music, and, working my way on university and whatnot. And all of a sudden I was sitting in the studio talking to these guys with an international career, and they started talking about the next record. So, well, the producer is gonna be probably this guy, American guy that lives in Germany. So we're gonna record in Germany, and we're gonna spend a month there. And at that point, I had barely left Brazil at all. The most I've gone was like 20 kilometers from the border in Argentina in a casino, and that was it. So I find myself sitting there talking about a month in Germany, records in Japan, record labels, and tour around the world. And it started sinking in slowly, because I was so unexperienced and so raw that I had no idea of how the music business worked. So it was my first real glimpse into that.
You mentioned that you went to Rock Brigade offices and you were presented with a contract. At that time...
Not right away.
Not right away.
We talked about the contract.
Right.
But not right away, yeah.
When this contract finally was presented to you, did you seek personal legal advice? I
did not. I just signed it. I was 20 years old, and I just wanted to sign it and get on with my life.
And did that in any way came to bite you in the ass at some point during your career, or was it all good?
Not really, because I think the terms were pretty clear. We had the freedom to talk and discuss eventual problems or questions that arose. So no, the contract itself was not one of those that, you regret for the rest of your life.
So, okay, after this...
Luckily.
So, after this photo shoot, do you remember when you guys started to rehearse and actually play the songs that eventually would become Rebirth, which, by the way, turned 20 years old in 2021? And
exactly.
Hopefully there will be some sort of celebration by Angra at some point, but that's another story.
There will be.
Oh,
yeah.
That's good to know. I'm glad to hear it.
I think if COVID allows, there will be.
Brilliant.
But yeah, we started rehearsing the new songs at Kiko's house. So he had a basement room, and we got a bunch of equipment and audio gear and room treatment and got it ready. And Kile set up his drums there. And at that point, I was so out of the market that I didn't have an amp. So one of the first things that Antonio, the manager, did was lend me some money so I could buy a proper amp to rehearse for the record, And yeah, so I remember they already had 4 or 5 songs. They already had a demo, which Kiko played bass on, actually. And those were the songs that they were using to audition the singers at the time. They were Running Alone, Acid Rain, Unholy Wars, and Rebirth. Those were the 4. And they were already working on more. And yeah, my role at the start was just try to understand what the band was about, try to, take it all in and respect the band's history. One of the first things that I did was ask Antonio for all the records, from the first to the last, and EPs and live records and whatnot. And I listened to all of them, and I learned all the songs. And I wanted to understand the band the best I could, So that gave me more information to be able to contribute as a bass player and, to be in context with what the band had done for the previous 10 years, so we could carry on doing something in those same lines. Because honestly, power metal, melodic metal was not my style. I was much more a prog thrash metal guy. So I had this period, of getting used to the new music, the new sound. Oh, yeah, and of course the new musicians. But at the same time, it was a very important learning period for me, because especially Kiko and Rafael, they were already experienced. They had already done a lot. And they are both very accomplished musicians who are very studied and know harmony and know Brazilian music and know jazz and know fusion and world music. They know a lot. So it was a period of a lot of exchange of information, a big school, to be honest.
How did you feel the transition from the very beginning of, getting together with these guys and then eventually recording Rebirth, which was, I'm not sure how was in the background and how was it for you guys in the band living that time, because it was obviously a massive transition from what Angra was during the 90s. It was a big lineup change, and very few bands can actually come out of that in grandiose way, which was what happened with Angra, because when Rebirth came out, there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding the name Angra, but as we all know, it was a huge success. It was like a massive, massive, massive success. Obviously, that the songs in the album are remarkable. The songwriting on that album is something that it's something that obviously passed the test of time. And how was it for you guys? Did you, when the album was being produced, recorded, and during that process, was there a feeling of like not really knowing what was going to happen, or were you, because obviously you were just getting into the seriousness of the business, so I'm not sure if you were already like tuning in with those things, but was there any conversations in the background, like in terms of understanding, okay, this is really gonna work, or was there a complete like shot in the dark?
I wouldn't say it was a complete shot in the dark, but there was a lot of uncertainty from the partners, especially record labels at the time. I remember Olivier Garnier, which was a very important character in the Angra's history. He came to Brazil. He wanted to see the band for himself. He wanted to discuss strategies. He wanted to make sure that they knew what they were doing, because he was one of the biggest responsible for Angra's success in Europe, actually. And just imagine that on the previous album, Angra had played the Bataclan in Paris, full packed, So there was a lot at stake at that time. And we, as we started listening to the songs and seeing the synergy in the band and how we worked together as a band and how the songs were coming out, we started getting more and more confident on this new, this new lineup, this new era of Angra, as it was aptly called later, the Nova Era. But there was, yes, uncertainty, I think, even from the guys, from Kiko and Rafa, because it was just a big, big risk, to have this name, a well-established, 10-year-old, world-famous band, and you have three guys that already have another band called Shaman, and they were already out releasing records and doing shows and whatnot. And fun fact, I even opened the first Shaman concert in São Paulo with Karma, actually. And it was already a big show in the first one. And they had the singer, which, usually is the biggest asset in a band. And especially in Andre's case, because he was already famous in Viper, and he was famous in Angra, and now he has another band, and he's famous in the band already again, even before the album came out. So there was that. But also at the time, if you remember, this genre of music was, exploding everywhere, and especially in Brazil and South America. So I think that was a factor as well, because bands like Gamma Ray, Stratovarius, Primal Fear, Halloween, they were all coming to Brazil, Rhapsody, and doing shows that were always packed in big venues in São Paulo, especially in Rio, and probably in Porto Alegre where you lived as well. So I think it was, helped by that moment in time that the market was so, welcoming to new bands. And I think also just the curiosity of people of what are these guys going to do now that the big shot Andre is out of the band and they lost two other members. What are they going to do? And as I said, as we developed the songs and recorded the songs and listened to the results, we became very confident because we knew we had, a banger in our hands. We knew the album was great. So it was just a matter of the public thinking the same. And little by little, that's what happened. So from the first shows of the tour, they were already full, if not packed. And from there, it was just, way up.
So when the time came to, think about another album. So you guys obviously, they made the right choices, choosing yourself, Edu and Achilles. It worked. Now it's time to think of the follow up to Rebirth, which we all know is arguably for a lot of people the best Angra record ever. Surpassing even the 90s albums with Angra. So what do you remember from that time? Because it was a very busy time. You guys were obviously touring. I mean, I think you toured Brazil on that on Rebirth, probably 2 or 3 times. I remember just in the south in Porto Alegre having, 2 or 3 concerts off that album alone, and always packed, like you just mentioned it. So did you guys have time to sit down and come and basically do an album as a band for the first time per se? Because I believe that kind of started all from scratch somehow, the ideas for Temple of Shadows. So what are your memories from that time, and did it actually happen that way? Did you guys sat down and started exchanging ideas and created an album as a whole?
Yes, there was a feeling of mission accomplished, because if you really listen to Rebirth, it's very inspired, especially on the tracks, the way they're organized and the track styles. It's very inspired by Angels Cry and Holy Land, because we wanted to be, as safe as possible since we already had such a big change. So we organized the record in a similar way to those first records. But after gold records, rave reviews everywhere, Japan loves the album, and the tour, very successful, we felt free to experiment. And also, we really developed as a band live on stage. And our, connection as musicians grew much, much stronger. We were playing better, sounding better, more confident. And so when the time came for the new album to be made, we were on fire, and we really wanted to show the people what we were capable of doing. It was like, now we already proved that we can do this. Now we're going to show you what else we can come up with. So it was a very creative time, very experimental, and we did things in that album that Angra had never done before, and we were just free, and very confident, fire in our eyes, and we wanted to just make the best album ever. And so the rehearsals were all in this spirit. I remember we had the custom of playing the songs way faster than they were, so we would be more prepared to play them at the true tempo of the song. And we were just so engaged and ready to rock the world and show what Angra was about, the new Angra and whatnot. So that was that feeling.
Is it Temple of Shadows one of those records that now, say 16 years later, you kind of feel, oh my God, it's getting harder and harder to play those songs, to perform those songs live?
They have always been hard, but at the same time, I'm not one to let myself fall behind what I did in the past. I always want to go forward, not backwards. So yeah, I can still play those songs, and of course, I need some preparation for songs like "Temple of Hate," which is an unusually fast song, which we didn't do many of, uh, even after that. But yeah, every Angra record is hard to play, and you need to be on top of your game if you want to play it properly. And I try to always do that. Of course, in the last 2 years, being at home with kids, not playing shows, that takes its toll on the playing and on the results. But yeah, I can still do it.
From all of those years of touring, I remember the Temple of Shadows tour in particular being obviously another huge, huge tour, but there were some very particular moments on that tour when Angra toured with Dream Theater in Italy and did the
Yeah,
Japanese tour with Nightwish. From
as
all
an
of
opener,
as an yeah, exactly. So all of the as Nightwish as the support for
not
Angra.
just support. Yes,
Exactly,
yeah.
yeah. So, which are things that that are just crazy to think about, which was so amazing, to have and actually seen from the outside, which was my case at the time. But do you from all of those years of touring, which tours do you recollect as being the most enjoyable and the ones that you were like, oh my god, like for example, I bet that playing with Dream Theater in Italy, that was a momentous moment for you, and so what things do you remember from all of those years of touring that you would say those were remarkable tours in terms of who you performed with, the stages that you shared with people throughout the world?
We had many great moments. For sure, the Dream Theater concerts were a highlight on that tour. And it was a 120 shows tour. It was very exhausting, but at the same time, great shows. The vibe in the band, though, was not great. So we we always had periods where the band was thriving in terms of people going to the shows and buying the records, but not exactly internally as a band, as a group. So I think actually the best moments I can recall on tour are the last two records, because we have now, and you know that very well, such a great lineup, not only of musicians but friends and people that enjoy each other's company. And I think we're pretty strong as a band still. So yeah, even though we may not play such big gigs, we may not play Nightwish as support and whatnot. The best memories I can recall being in Angra is the last two records for sure. And but of course, we had moments that were very important to us. I remember in 2011 we played the Rock in Rio. There was a lot of anticipation to that first time Angra in Rock in Rio. After 21 years, 20 years that the band was in existence, and the show was a disaster. But we came back in 2015 and, just did an amazing show. We had Dee Snider, we had Doro Pesh, and the show was awesome. And it was such a special moment, not only because we're playing Rock in Rio, for Christ's sake. Rock in Rio is the dream of any Brazilian musician to be on that stage. But after having passed through the 2011 show, which was such a disaster, to doing this show, such a great show in front of a great crowd of 60,000 plus people, it was very special. It's one of those moments. And to me, honestly, playing in Japan every time is such a highlight. And it's probably my favorite place in the world to be and to play. And every time I leave Japan, I wonder, when is it going to be next time for me in Japan? Because I just love it so much.
Yeah, Japan is, I mean, for me, it was so amazing to have had the opportunity to be with you guys on the last tour there, because obviously Japan was such a remarkable territory for Angra. That's where Angra kind of like exploded first outside of Brazil in the early 90s, in the first half of the 90s. And then obviously, always following what's happening with the band. So Japan was always that kind of place that, and seeing the adoration that fans they've been carrying since, well, the early 90s, for like 30 years now. So it's such an incredible experience to having had the chance to be there. Felipe,
And we will do that again.
we most certainly will. Do you think that, for example, you mentioned that differences and difficulties amongst the players and in the band, because obviously, again, it's five individuals, and just by what you mentioned it to us here today, the fact that you've met with one of the musicians prior to joining the band, and then you basically just learn about each other on the go, and you're involved in this worldwide business. I can't think of many other businesses that you would join a partnership with other business people, on this case artists, which makes it even harder to start or just join a company on a worldwide scale without knowing people very well first, without getting to know each other. But in the world of music, bands, they tend to be kind of like that. They are thrown in this thing together. They have musical connections which they share on that particular moment, and that's why it works. But when it comes out of that, room where the magic is happening, you start to realize how different people are, and obviously fame, because especially for you and Achilles and Philippe and Edu, you haven't had the exposure that Kiko and Rafael had during the 90s. So all the fame that the band achieved, which again, arguably bigger in terms of numbers than the band had achieved during the 90s, in terms of the scale of the shows and the size of the productions and all of that. So what are your views in terms of that? Do you think that is the differences sometimes they grow so much bigger because there's a lack of communication, or because they are, at the end of the day, something that people just because of immaturity perhaps don't have the skills to try and talk it through, and then when it becomes public, or when there's more people involved, outsiders, management and things like that, things just get to a point where there's no way to get back. So basically what I'm trying to ask is, what do you see, or what sort of advice would you give to musicians perhaps starting a band nowadays, in regards of how to communicate and how to try and get things working, instead of creating animosity and eventually breakups?
Yeah, first and foremost, communication is key. Being able to talk, just simply talk about whatever you have in mind that's bothering you, that you would like to change, or just having that open communication channel is so important. Because these things, they are the sparks for much bigger problems on the way ahead. But I think my biggest lesson maybe is the following. When you have any group of people, you're going to have different personalities, different talents, different weaknesses, and learning how to recognize the best and worst in people is very important, so that you never expect something from someone that they cannot give you. Meaning that each person has skills and talents where they can shine and feel good about what they're doing, and anyone have their weaknesses where they feel uncomfortable, they don't perform as well. So I think a good leader, or a very cohesive group of people, is one that knows how to recognize talents and weaknesses and work in a way that you extract the best from the people, and never expect something that they cannot give you, because these expectations that get frustrated, and that's also a spark for animosity problems and people just getting angry with time and short patience, and the communication goes away, and when you realize it's already too late. So I think nowadays we know that. We know that each one in the band has skills, talents that we must learn how to make work in favor of the band. And also this, I think that the group needs to recognize that the band is first and foremost. Not what I want, not what you want, not what he wants personally, but the band. What does the band benefit from the most? And learn how to let go of your, own ideas and your own desires if they're not what the band needs to do at that moment. And that's very hard to do and very hard to learn. But once you do learn and start to practice it, the group really benefits from it.
Well, you clearly managed to do that very well, because from, 20 years ago, you're still the one that is in Angra and is Rafael's partner, Kiko's partner, still playing with Kiko, still having a great relationship with all of those musicians. And just hearing now what you're saying, and from our own experience, there's a lot of people that come and go in this world of ours, isn't it? In the music business, in all levels, from management to crew to, people that you end up trusting and end up like evolving, because everyone is on a different stage and growing in a different stage of their lives in whatever level they are involved within the business. And I was just remembering now how I actually first met you. It was actually doing a workshop in Porto Alegre during the Rebirth tour. Do you remember that? The show was in the evening.
Yeah.
And we went just round the corner to this place to do the workshop and then back to the venue. So it's, and I think the older we get, I mean, I'm speaking for myself personally, relationships with people that you care about and that you have connections with in terms of similarities and how you grow and how you exchange ideas and eventually become a better human being. Like long-lasting relationships are so important, isn't it? It's just we live in a world where sometimes people just think for the moment, and they don't think the reflections that certain attitudes you might have might reflect on your future. So being able to like I said, it's almost 20 years since we first met, and we're still here, and actually our relationship has grown throughout the years on a personal level and on a professional level. So that's really, really, really fucking amazing. Felipe, it has been an absolute delight. I'm enjoying so much this conversation, but I know that you probably have two little ones to cater for. So I'm going to start to wrap up this conversation, and I'm going to take you into what I call the roller coaster questions. Are you ready for it?
Let's do it, man.
Amazing. So the first one is, do you have or follow any morning routines?
Kind of. I wake up, usually I wake up to, get my son from bed because he's already up before me, and I prepare his milk, and once he's cared for, I prepare my coffee and have my breakfast, and then I sit on the computer and start my day, my work day. That's usually what I do.
Are you a spiritual person at all, or have any particular beliefs?
Not any religions, or I don't believe any superpowers. I won't say higher power. I believe in the higher power of nature and the universe. I don't believe any entities. That's how I would put it.
What's your view about money?
I think money is important and has to be taken care of, because It's not everything. It won't buy you happiness. It won't make you happy per se, but the lack of it can make you very miserable. So, especially as a musician, I think it's very important to learn how to deal with money so that it don't come back and bite you in the ass later on. You need to know basically how to plan for the future. And I think money should be enough to make you happy in small increments throughout your life. I'm not the type of person who relies on big events, like a big trip or that special sports car or whatever big events I need to be happy. I have learned to be happy when I, go with my family to a restaurant and have a good time, or when I go to the beach with my son, or when I buy a little something for me that I wanted, not anything expensive, just a small something, and learned how to, indulge yourself a little bit every day so that you're happy a little bit every day. You can't be happy all the time, but I think we can be happy a little bit every day.
That's a very, very good answer. Very good. I really like that one. What do you do to unwind? What's the perfect lazy day on your books?
Lately, it has been laying on the couch, watching YouTube videos. I'm back. I'm back. I'll answer again. Lately has been laying on the couch just watching YouTube videos whenever I have time for myself, which is rare. But it could also be playing PlayStation or, just playing bass or guitar, writing music. I brought my bass here to the beach and I expect to have my moments. I have to learn the songs from my solo album, which I plan to do some shows in the start of the year. So yeah, I have that to do, and that's both work and leisure, So yeah, that's what I play tennis, ride go-karts. Yeah.
Amazing. So you just mentioned about your solo record that came out in 2021, and diverting a little bit from the roller coaster questions, and now you mentioned that you want to play some shows next year. Are you already working on that? Are you already thinking about when and with who you're gonna be doing that? What can you spoil us here with?
I have the band already worked out. It's Alexandre Aposan on drums, Dalton Santos on guitar, who recorded a lot of the guitars on the album, and the keyboard player called Bruno Alves, who also recorded a lot of keyboards on the album. And I have a first date to be confirmed on the February the 6th at the Bourbon Street Music Club in São Paulo. And I'm trying to work on other dates around it so we can, rehearse and be ready and do more shows, not just one. But I have other plans throughout the year. We have, as you know, the SESC here in Brazil, which are very nice. They're not government run, they're private enterprises, but they're focused on culture and leisure for the workers. And they usually have very nice theaters and venues, so I'm working on some shows there as well. And working on some international stuff as well.
That's super cool to hear it. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
What are you listening to these days?
Nothing new. Actually, yes. I'm listening to the latest Dream Theater record. I just started listening to it just now because I didn't have the time before or the state of mind to properly take in the new Dream Theater album, which for me is, kind of important since Dream Theater is one of the main bands that I've listened throughout my life. But other than that, it's just old music from my playlist. Silverchair, Tears for Fears, Seal. I think maybe the newer bands would be Tesseract, Leprous, and Textures, so not very new at all.
Have you had the chance to check the Get Back documentary, the Beatles documentary?
Not yet, but I really want to.
Man, yes. I've watched it already twice, and mind you, all the 3 episodes take you for 8 hours. So it's honestly, it's one of those things that, every musician friend that I have, I'm saying it. you must see it. I mean, I'm a big Beatles fan, and I wasn't till
Me too.
But the funny thing is, I wasn't a big Beatles fan till literally 2-3 years ago. So it's something that when I was a teenager, I had the records. I've obviously listened to the big songs, to the very famous ones. But it was, when you were, into heavy metal and rock, you're so like crazy about all of those bands that you grew up listening to, that some of the you forget about the basics, right? Where did everything come from? Where did it all start? Where did rock and roll come from? Who influenced the guys that are influencing me? So anyway, so Beatles became like a literally like I'm super crazy about them, and the documentary is so incredible because it's such a historical piece of. I mean, having to have the chance to actually see these guys being filmed inside of the studio while they were creating music in 1968, and we're talking about the Fab Four, the Beatles. I mean, I'm so just thankful that they thought about doing such thing back then. Yeah. Things that nowadays is so common, documentaries in the studio, documentary of this, but they were like the pioneers in so many ways, But when it comes to this particular thing now that just came out, it's honestly, it's mind-blowing because you see the relationship amongst them and how they discuss things, how the creativity was pouring out of them, and how perfect they were in so many ways. Like, I mean, it's all analog. It's like a 4-track. They recorded on a 4-track and eventually on an 8-track, and it's all like, it's unbelievable. It's really like, I mean, I think you're really, really, really gonna enjoy it because it's, I mean, for a lot of people,
I think so.
I have mentioned it. If you're not a musician or doesn't work with music, it might be a little bit tedious because you're gonna see they working in the studio. And it's like, you're not going to sit for 2 hours and 40 minutes just if you're not a big Beatles fan or if you're like somewhat involved in music. And it's great. It's honestly great. I can't recommend it enough. And I obviously get very passionate about it, clearly. So
I'll try to watch it now that I am on vacation.
Try to do that. It's a good time to do it. Very good time to do it.
Yeah.
Felipe, my friend, thanks again for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I mean, yeah, you've been like, I mean, we've known each other for such a long time now. And, well, such a long time, almost 20 years. So many adventures throughout the world. We literally traveled the whole world together. And yeah, I mean, it's just an amazing pleasure to finally have you on the podcast. Thank you again for your time. And hopefully 2022, we're going to be spending some time together, shows in South America and throughout the world. Yeah.
I can't wait, man. It was great talking to you. And I'm hoping we can see each other in person very soon.
Take care, Felipe.
And thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation, this podcast, as much as I did doing it. So if that's the case, please do follow on Instagram at rollercoastercarl, myself at Carl Casagrande, on Twitter, same thing, Facebook, same thing. Do subscribe. Do subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on Spotify. That's very, very much appreciated. Thank you and have a great, great day. Cheers. Bye-bye.